Hey, okay, so we are doing the Christmas truce. Guys, this is cool. We've studied World War One. I know that you guys remember generally about it, okay? Paula, you and Ashley weren't here for World War One. Ashley loves history, and you sometimes don't, Paula. But that's okay, we love you anyway. But I know that you know about World War One, and now we're gonna learn a little bit more about it today in an interesting English activity. Okay, this whole page right here is on World War One and trench warfare. You guys remember trench warfare in World War One? All of the soldiers fought from the trenches, which were holes and like basically not even holes, like calles built into the ground so that, and they're called bunkers as well. So they were in the ground and could come up to shoot, right? And that was the style of the World War One warfare, right? It was dangerous, it was disgusting, it was depressing, it was not a fun way to fight, but that's how they fought, okay? Remember that it was very scary to be in the trenches. One, there was a lot of disease inside the trenches, there was a lot of dead bodies, there was rats, there was different stuff like that. But on top of that, if you had to be the person to get out of the trench in order to send a message to another part of the trench, you're probably gonna be shot on the way there, okay? If you wanna see one movie that involves the trenches, that would be 1917, is the most recent war movie that I've seen that shows a little bit of the trenches, okay? But that's what this whole section is right here, and I'm gonna insert a 3-minute video into this video today to show you about trench warfare. And then you're going to do this informative plan, okay, to show the analysis of World War I, 1914 to what year. All your information is found on this piece of paper right here. The only part of the information that's not gonna have a lot of meat would be the early trenches versus the later trenches. But there is like 1 or 2 sentences about it in here, so you can find stuff. If you wanna find more stuff, you're gonna have to look on the internet for it, but you're not required to. You're only required to use the information from here to answer these questions. So go ahead and watch this video on trench warfare, because I do want you to see it and see what it was like. Because this whole thing is an English analysis, but it's also to take history to learn from it. So it makes it interesting, it makes it more enriching, and you need to know this kind of stuff that happened in our past. So there you go, trench warfare.
Life in a trench, I'd like to explain in one word: horrific. It's mud, it's death, it's rats, it's stench, and soldiers develop an attitude in a trench that everybody is going to die.
Life in the trench was abysmal. There were several lines of trenches, and the front line trenches, of course, were the most dangerous because they were constantly under fire. Incoming!
The Germans dug assiduously, building dry, safe, and comfortable trenches for themselves with bunkers that actually had electricity and sometimes running water. The British and French, who were convinced that they were never going to be there for that long, didn't spend nearly the same effort. And so their trenches tended to be muddy and wet and not that safe.
Disease ran rampant. It was very difficult to get any sort of sleep, a decent hot meal, keep your clothes dry, and more importantly, to keep your sanity.
There were so many health problems of just simple disease that took much more men out of combat than direct fire.
I think one word that would surprise people about life in a trench: boredom. A lot of time is spent just sitting, cleaning tools, and being scared to death the battle's going to start any minute.
It was just the day-to-day monotony, being trapped in this very small space and fighting for a war that's really fought in inches.
The idea of open warfare, of fighting out into what they called no man's land, wasn't working. The technology of the war had advanced so much with machine guns, artillery that could lob shells a mile. It became mostly a defensive war early on, and as a defensive war, you wanted to protect your troops, so the miles and miles of trenches were built.
There were often bodies buried in the sides of trenches, bodies lying out in the open in front of the trenches. The soldiers were experiencing not only the war that they were fighting at the moment, but the war that had been going on throughout those trenches for all of the years of the war.
A young lieutenant writes his mother and says, "I haven't been killed yet, but it's only a matter of time." That's typical of the way soldiers felt about life in the trench. You just did it. You existed day to day, tried to go on, keep your chin up, but one day, the bullet was going to have your name on it, and you were going to perish. You weren't going home.
Okay, so all the crazy, sad stuff about war. And now we get to introduce to you something beautiful that happened during the war, okay? It's called the Christmas Truce of 1914. A truce in Spanish, let me look it up. Okay, well, I've never heard of this word in my life, but tregua is what they say is a truce. A truce is where you like stop fighting for a little bit, okay? So that's what they did in 1914 for Christmas, you guys. They say here's the thing. They know that it happened. They know the truce happened, but they're learning about it from all of these diary entries. All these people that wrote in their journals or wrote letters home to their family. So there's different accounts of it depending on what part of the line you were in, what part of the trench you were in, to what exactly happened. So they're not sure exactly what happened, but basically the Germans and the United States and England were friends that day. That they forgot about the fighting. They didn't, some of them didn't trust, but some of them forgot about the fighting. They were like playing together. They were exchanging gifts together and doing different stuff on that day. And everyone said it was a beautiful time that finally the war had stopped just for a day. And it was a day that they would never forget. It was, actually, I think it was 48 hours, called the Christmas Truce of 1914. So you're gonna read these diary entries, and there's a video on that as well, only 3 minutes again, but it's really interesting, you guys, where like, they just stopped fighting for a little bit and spent time together as people, not as enemies, okay? In the Christmas Truce of 1914. What you're gonna do with that is read it and then you compare the accounts, okay? Cooper's perspective, Calder's perspective, and Blundell's perspectives about what had happened, okay? And then you're gonna do a comparison and contrast between what a primary source is and what a secondary source is for history. Guys, primary sources are the ones that have the most reliable information. I'm just gonna tell you that. And secondary sources are the ones that are like a retelling or a resumen. And so there's maybe details that are not exactly as accurate as a primary source, even though a primary source can also be incorrect as well if you can't trust the person that was giving you the primary source. Like for instance, if they're writing it in their diary and they're lying about it, but for the most part, primary sources are more reliable to historians, okay? So enjoy that. Here's your Christmas truce video as well. And then you're left to do that. There is no instructions on this paper that you have to do as well because it's easy, okay? Just take this piece of paper, answer the questions about it on the back. It's reading infographic analysis, okay? Good stuff because you get bombarded with this stuff all the time throughout the day and the news and everything like that, and it's good to know how to analyze it and discern from it, okay? So here's a Christmas Truce video, and there's your assignment. Bye.
We were in the trenches on Christmas Eve, and about 8:30, the firing was almost at a standstill.
An einigen Stellen waren auf der Brustwehr Tannenbäume mit gelben, brennenden Kerzen gestellt, worüber die Engländer durch Zurufe und Hängeklatschen ihre Freude ausdrückten.
We had a commotion in the German trenches. and then they began to sing Silent Night.
My grandfather was a captain in the Royal Warwicks. He's a man I knew little about until I read his diaries. He made contact with two German officers at dawn on Christmas Day. That was really the start of a mass exchange of things in no man's land between German and British soldiers.
As the day broke, the enemy would be seen to bob up and down, and as the British did not fire, they plucked up enough courage to get out of their trenches.
I met their officer, and we arranged a local armistice for 48 hours. As far as I can tell, this effort of ours extended itself throughout the whole line. The soldiers on both sides met in their hundreds and exchanged greetings and gifts.
The Christmas truce wasn't just one event, it was a whole series of events scattered along a fairly small area of the front line, but it certainly wasn't continuous.
Some soldiers died on Christmas Day 1914. They got out of the trench thinking there was a truce, and they were shot by Germans who didn't want a truce. So it was a very courageous thing for them to do.
It was an experience of a lifetime, I should think, and one very rare.
Dann wurde alles ausgetauscht, was jeder gerade bei sich hatte. Tabak, Schokolade, Schnaps, Ordenbänder und vieles andere mehr. Es war ein drolliger Anblick.
During the day we had football matches with a new ball sent by some kind friends. So you see, it takes a good lot to upset our men and make us forget Christmas.
We may never know what really happened. We can't be 100% sure that there was a football match between the Germans and the Allies. There probably was, almost certainly was. What matters is the message that that whole event carries, which is, you know, even at the toughest of times, in the heat of war and in the most dreadful occasions, there can be great humanity.
The Christmas truce certainly happened. Who knows all the details behind it, but it's a really good way for people to start to understand the First World War and understand the humanity, not just the scale and destruction, but also all those small moments of charity and support and human contact that easily get lost otherwise.
It is a great hope for future peace when two great nations, hating each other as foes have seldom hated, should on Christmas Day, and for all that the word implies, lay down their arms, exchange smokes, and wish each other happiness.